Hello, this is Monique Tsosie, and this is for TEL703 for the Reading Reflection Journal number 6. And the week's topic is recognizing the role of self-regulation, co-regulation, and socially shared regulation in teaching and learning, and also considering how I will intentionally plan for regulation of learning as I design an innovation for my local context of practice. So the first part of pre-reading, so before I even started reading, I was going over some of the questions, like what are some of the strategies you use to monitor and manage your own learning and your own performance in your local context of practice. So not knowing fully what self-regulation, co-regulation, and shared regulation meant, I was kind of thinking like, okay, like self-regulation, like, you're looking through yourself, you're having your own goals. So before reading, I took it as like what type of strategies I'm using to monitor and manage my own learning. And I related it to work. So with work, I have my own goals that I have for myself each week. And I monitor that and I see if I'm hitting those goals, if I'm missing those goals, like what adjustments I need to make the following day or like the following week. So I definitely always like question if I'm grasping the concept of, what we're supposed to be doing as far as like reaching out to students. And the second question here is, how do other people help you monitor and manage your learning? I guess just giving some context, I work with ASU and I work with Starbucks students, and my whole role is reaching out to these students that have different triggers. And triggers means that these triggers populate. And a few examples are like a SAP appeal, like borderline probation, not registered for spring session B coming up, students that received a D or an E in a class, or like students that are freshmen coming in. So those are the type of triggers. And let's say like a freshman, I could have like 100 triggers in there. That means like 100 students are within that one trigger. And I have to reach out and introduce myself and get to know the student and go over resources as a freshman. And then like another part is borderline probation. So I could have like 50 students in borderline probation with that trigger, and I have to reach out and discuss like what borderline probation means, what to help with different resources to help them get out of that, and just be more mindful of that. And then another one is like not registered for spring B. An example is I had maybe like 250 students that were in that category, that trigger. And so my role is to reach out to those students and to see what's preventing them from registering for spring session B. So those are 3 areas, but of course there's a ton of other different triggers or cases. So when I say I set goals for myself, my goal this week was I believe I had 150 or so students that were still not registered for spring B. So my goal for myself this week was to close out all of those cases, is to reach out, send a message, send an email and a text message to all these 150 students. So that was like a goal for myself. So I feel like that's kind of me like self-regulating, like, okay, I'm going to hit this goal, and if I don't hit this goal by this week, then what do I need to do next week to better prepare, to kind of align with the team where I'm at, with my coworkers. And so that's like the kind of the backstory of like the first part of it, the regulation. And then so back to this question, how do other people help you monitor and manage your learning? I feel like when I thought of this before reading the articles, I thought of like my boss, like my manager, like, okay, my manager helps me regulate my learning because he is listening to phone calls that I have. Every phone call that we have, it's graded on a quality assurance rubric. So any one of our calls could be pulled, like all calls are recorded. So anyone could be pulled. Someone, which is the quality assurance representatives, listen to it. They grade our calls, they give us feedback. And then my manager does the same thing. He listens to 4 calls a month, grades those calls, gives us feedback based on this rubric. So I felt like that is what I thought of if someone's helping me regulate my learning. And with my supervisor, we have a one-on-one meeting every 2 weeks. And within those meetings, we sometimes randomly listen to a call, and then he gives me feedback on what to continue to work on or what new things to work on, what I did well. And then we go from there. So that's where I took it, like how do others help monitor and manage your learning? And then how do I help others with these processes? So like with the learning and managing, I feel like a lot of it we communicate through Slack. So the what is it, like the messaging online with my coworkers, so a lot of it is through Slack. Others will ask questions and then I will respond, and we kind of all answer each other's questions, work together. So I feel like a big part is communicating through Slack, or even if someone has a question, having a quick Zoom call with them. And then the next question is, in what ways are monitoring and managing to learn a social activity? So again, before reading the articles this week, I viewed managing learning as a social activity already, as collaborating with my coworkers, my peers, on questions that we have about work, about these cases, about unique situations with students. And I also viewed it as like with my supervisor, he gives us feedback, and I feel like it's all collaborative, like we're collaborating together and learning from that. And that's how I viewed it. So that's section 1, pre-reading. And then step 2 is post-reading. So the muddiest part, explaining like what was difficult to understand. I feel like a big part, and it's not anything new, it's still a continuous thing for me, is the terminology and the acronyms used in articles, and it surrounds like the statistics part of it, like the research gathered and the data, putting it all together. And it's like the statistics part, like the SD means like standard deviation. So I know that it means standard deviation, but I don't know what that even means. And while I was reading the article about grit, let me find it. I know there was a few articles about grit, but while I was reading the one, perseverance and passion, I was just, anytime I get to the details about the data collected and how they put it in a graph and the standard deviation and the mean and all of that, it goes over my head. It gets really fuzzy. So I feel like anytime I'm reading, a lot of the times that's one of the muddiest parts for me, almost every time. And an example is, while I was reading that article about grit, there's a a little quote, and this is just an example, like this is on page 2 of that article. It states, to be sure, restrictions on range of IQ partly accounted for the slightness of this gap. There was sufficient variance in IQ standard deviation 10.6 compared with standard deviation 16 in the general population in the sample to have expected a much greater difference. Like I have no idea what that means. I'm reading it and I'm like, I don't understand what that means. I don't know, I know there's a gap. I don't it goes over my head. And then another example is like, and this is also on page 2 of that same article. I guess I can find the actual page number because I know it's not page 2, but here, okay, so it's like page 2, so it's on 1088 on the same article, the passion, grit, perseverance and passion for long-term goals. So it's on the same article, but this is the quote on there. It's also on that page 1088. Uncorrected correlation between consciousness and job performance range from R.09 to R.13, depending on the occupational group. And then again, it's just boom over my head of like, what is R? And I just feel like I can grasp the details as far as like when it's explaining a theory, like when maybe I need to like reread it and keep going over it and I can, grasp it. But anytime I get to anything that has to do with like standard deviation, the data collected, it's really, yeah, I have a hard time with it. I feel like that's always the muddiest part of reading articles. So again, I definitely got the gist of it, but once it started talking about all of the data gathered and all of that information, very muddy for me, super, super muddy. And then so a burning question, what do I want to learn more about and understand? I feel like that's like the biggest area for me. The biggest area of opportunity is for me to better understand how to read the data, how to even interpret the data, how to even understand like what is standard deviation, how is this calculated, like what does this mean? And I don't need maybe I'm overthinking it too much, but I feel like that's just a huge one for me all the time, is that. And I feel like maybe not necessarily like a burning question, but I definitely want to learn more about how grit and like that perseverance ties in with resiliency, just because my whole problem of practice is around first generation college students and resilience. I feel like I definitely want to learn more about that. I started learning more about grit this past, week and a half. So definitely been something I wanted to look into a little bit more. So maybe 2 theoretical frameworks, what I'm thinking of is probably, looking into grit, like the grit theory more, looking into resilience theory, looking into self-efficacy. I feel like those were the top 3 that I was kind of exploring this week. Of course, it's always been resiliency, like that theory, but the other 2 added on, grit and self-efficacy. I feel like in previous weeks, I haven't really dove into that until this, the past like week and a half or so. And of course, I want to learn more about the different instruments that are going to be used to help this performance design. Yeah. And then so the third point is, making a connection with the scholarly practice. So how do these ideas relate to my workplace, my community of practice, or my problem of practice? So it says here, in particular, you might consider how the theoretical frameworks used in this article you read might be used to frame your own action research project. So I feel like definitely relates to the workplace. I can absolutely see it here as far as like self regulation. And when I'm looking over it a little bit more, like absolutely relates to my work area. I'm going to pull up the article really fast. So um I feel like I can see it already, and I feel like it's something we do already at my workplace, but it's not labeled as this is self-regulation, this is co-regulated learning, this is socially shared regulation. So just looking over it, self-regulated learning, definitely it's more of individualized, of course, like put like it the focus is on like motivation, strategies, and skills, so definitely honing in on that. And then I felt like I really did notice, co-regulated learning, it's the transitional process, um and it's more so um comes from different influences within the community of practice that you're a part of. So like the example with tying the shoe, right? So like the mother of the child that was tying the shoe in co-regulated learning, they were no longer holding the kid's hand while they're tying the shoe. They were asking details as far as like questions around it, right? So a few examples is here. It's like the mother, and this is going back to that scenario of, the child tying the shoelace and learning how to tie their shoe. And in co-regulated learning, the mother's no longer holding the hand, they're more so like being that observer and asking questions. So the example here is like the mother might ask questions like, what do you know about how to connect those two laces? How do you know when you have completed the first step properly? I took all of that and I thought about it like with my manager, right? So like when we first go into our role as a success coach, we're in that self-regulated learning, we're with the trainer at first, we're learning all this information. So they're kind of really holding our hand throughout this whole process, like right beside us, and teaching us all of these things. And then after we have a 2-week training about what we need to do, then they set us up on our own, like, okay, now you're ready to go on your own. And then now it's less hand holding and it's more like, okay, now you're in your role, you're doing the required task, right? So then instead of like really holding your hand through it, a lot of the time the supervisor is asking us those questions, like if we have a question like how do we handle this situation with the student, then my supervisor's favorite response is always, let me ask you this. And it's always that, well, let me ask you, what would you say in this situation? And I feel like he's more so asking us open-ended questions at this co-regulated learning portion of it. So definitely see it within my workplace alone. And then of course, socially shared regulation. I feel like that I took it as like, and of course this is the definition, process by which multiple others regulate their collective activity. From this perspective, goal and standard are co-constructed and the desired product is socially shared. Got it. So for me, I took that as like, okay, this socially shared regulation is like myself, right? My manager. And then it's like the trainers, it's my coworkers, it's the the supervisors above my manager that listen to phone calls. It's all of us together because our department is really focusing on the quality of our conversations and student engagement. So they're really taking on like how are students feeling during our phone calls, what are their feedback. So it's all about student engagement now. And I feel like that's in a whole, that's how I took it, like socially regulated socially shared regulation is all of us in one going towards that goal, like meeting the students' needs. So that's what I took from it, like in that section, how is it related to my workplace? And then problem of practice, I didn't really, maybe I need to think more on it as far as like self-regulated learning and all of that, and put it into words as far as like how it goes into my problem of practice, because I feel like my problem of practice, I'm focusing on first generation college students and how resilience plays a part in their life. And I wanted to use like a photo elicitation format to get feedback on how students progress and how resilience may assist them. And I know everything I said may be completely biased, and again trying to figure out questions that are unbiased, or don't have that biased approach. So I guess going back, that could be a burning question, just thinking about it, like asking myself, how does self-regulated learning, core-regulated learning, and socially shared regulation apply to my problem of practice when I'm focusing on first-generation college students and resiliency? So I guess that would be a question, burning question to kind of think through, because I felt like I really saw it clear when I was thinking of work, not necessarily like problem of practice. So definitely something to get into a little bit more. And I also really enjoyed the articles about grit. um I feel like the articles about grit really resonated a little bit more with my problem of practice. Like I could see some alignment there, because grit from the article, perseverance and passion for long-term goals. So they who is it? Duckworth and Peterson define grit as perseverance and passion for long-term goals. So grit entails working strenuously toward challenges, maintaining effort and interest over years despite failure, adversity, and plateaus in progress. I feel like that was so big when it comes to resiliency. I feel like they really go hand in hand, and I definitely want to dive a little bit more into grit, to see, to find out more information about it, because I feel like resiliency is that process to overcome or to like bounce back, come back after someone, like a student, faces challenging life experiences. And it states here, of course, like through mental, emotional, behavioral situations. So I just feel like those two go so hand in hand, because resiliency is a student deciding that they're going to continue in a class, they're going to continue their education, versus be or bounce back despite all of these challenges that they have. Because I feel like first generation college students have a lot of different challenges. It's a wide variety of challenges. A lot of first generation college students, majority are minorities and are low income. So they face a ton of different challenges there. And despite all of these challenges and difficulties, they still continue. They have that resiliency to continue. So I feel like that's super, very, very similar, very aligned with like grit. Grit talks about long term, and college is usually around 4 years, maybe a little bit more for some. Well, at least for the first time college student, like a bachelor's degree. So I feel like that is over years. So I feel like they do really go hand in hand there. And I was reading, and I was looking over like a TED talk and looking over grit and over resiliency, and I saw this quote on there. It says, "Grit is the engine that moves us towards our goal. Resiliency is the oil that keeps us moving." And I felt like that was just super, super important, because like, yes, grit, you have to have, that perseverance, that passion for like that long-term goal, which with first generation college students, a lot of it is, graduation, getting through classes. That's the long-term goal. And resiliency is that oil that keeps them moving forward. So despite, all these challenges, unique challenges, right, they keep moving forward. So I feel like definitely super important as far as like having that mindset to keep continuing. So very, very long, drawn out answer, but that's how I more so saw like the grit and how that applies to my problem of practice. And then with the self-regulation, I saw how that mainly applied to like my workspace. And then step 3, so this is post discussion. So here it says, and I'm not going through every single question, but just kind of going through, some of them that pop out. Did you make any connections between module 7 and any experience from previous modules? Yes, with module 7, definitely made some connections, because when we were doing the slides, I'm trying to think if it was it is 703. So it's in 703 in module 5, the knowledge building Google Slides. I feel like, it related me back to that when I'm reading through those articles there. And then also I feel like it overlapped a little bit, because with 711, our discussion this week was on performance measurement. And in our discussion as a group about performance measurement, grit was brought up, self-efficacy and grit was brought up. So I feel like they have been discussed before, and I felt like there was an overlap with those two areas, just because that's, what I'm kind of really focusing in on. And I definitely saw an overlap there. So another question is, what steps do you take as you begin designing an innovation to address your problem of practice? Being that we were talking about performance measurement in TEL 711, like how are we going to go about performance measurement, different instruments? One thing that I kept looking into, because I do want to learn more about like resiliency, and I do want to learn more about like self-efficacy and sorry, just lost it. Grit, right? So some of the performance measurements that I kept thinking about is hold on, I'm looking at notes right here. So it goes over 2 different measurements, like an individual attitude and attitudinal measures. So what I was thinking of is like, I know it's like, how to go about designing your problem of practice. The biggest thing I just kept going back to, because I feel like we just talked about it and like it's kind of overlapping, is the performance measurement in TEL 711. I felt like I came across academic resiliency scale, ARS 30, and then also general academic self-efficacy scale. Those 2 are different measures to question students to have like a questionnaire. So the ARS, which is the academic resiliency scale, it consists of 30 questions, and it's broken into different sections. So like section 1 is like questions about perseverance. Section 2 is like questions about reflecting and seeking help. Section 3 is all about like emotional responses. So how it goes is you're asking questions and the student is rating it from like a 5-point scale, like 1 likely, or I'm sorry, like unlikely versus 5 very likely, so they're doing it on a scale of what may resonate with them. And a few of those questions that I thought of, that were on there is like, I would seek encouragement from family and friends. And then as a student, I'm thinking like, very unlikely. Then that kind of rates like where you're at with like your academic resiliency scale. And then like I would set my own goals for achievement. Is that very unlikely or is that very likely? So that is what I was thinking of like as a performance measurement. And then I was also thinking of general academic self-efficacy scale. This one, it's 23 statements using a 9-point level of agreement. So it's like completely disagree, completely agree, and like agree. So the students belief in their various academic challenges. So, okay, so it goes over, it's like statements. So it's 23 statements. And an example is like, I know I have the ability to complete this course successfully. There's that. And then whether a student rates it like agree or disagree. So those are the two that I was thinking of, like the measurements, general academic self-efficacy scale, and then academic resiliency scale. I was thinking of those two, and that's just really how I saw them really aligning. And yeah, and I don't know if I mentioned already, this is step 3, post discussion. And what a few other questions here is to what extent do you feel you got what you hoped to get from this week's module activities? Definitely was very, very happy to go over the discussion. I feel like the video discussions over Zoom are really helpful because you can really bounce ideas off of each other. And I feel like I didn't even think about self-efficacy until it was really brought up. It kept getting brought up, and I'm like, self-efficacy, I'm going to do more research on that. So I feel like my biggest takeaways this week is like grit, resiliency, and self-efficacy theories. So I want to do more research on that end. And what do you bring to this place this week? What would be missed by your cohort community if you were not here? I felt like I brought exactly what I just went over. I did mention that the academic resilience scale, and then also the other scale, the general academic self-efficacy scale. I was under the impression that we had to look up a performance measurement that we were thinking of using. So that's exactly what I was thinking. So I'm going through researching like, okay, what type of performance measurement may I use without trying to like reinvent the wheel here. So that was my takeaway from it. And a lot of the students that I was communicating with, they did not take it that way. They were saying like, oh, I thought it was like, kind of more generalized, like we're going to chit chat about this, more generalized. So I feel, and then they ended our discussion with, I'm going to go find more I'm going to go find performance measurements that may be tweaked a little bit, tried to, to change it up a little bit to fit their problem of practice, which was not something that they were going over just yet. So I feel like if anything, that would be the biggest thing missed if I was not participating in the class discussion this week. So thank you for listening. And again, this is for the Reading Reflection Journal. Thank you.